For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Carl Kane, Artistic Director of Gretna Music, and it's our pleasure and honor to be joined by Dave Harris, the Music Director for the Raleigh Ringers. Dave, thanks so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Can't wait to be back.
Yeah, we've been waiting since 2019. Looking forward to it on July the 9th. Dave, I want to thank you especially because I believe you had to cut a rehearsal short for us today.
Actually, we had to just keep it on time. We had one of the new developments we've put together since COVID, and we started just this week, is some more educational groups. So we had the first meeting of what we call the Atlantic Ringers this morning. It's more of a very basic group to learn to ring. And we finished up just after 11:30, so this worked out just fine.
Is the Atlantic Ringers, is it a youth group specifically, or is it beginner?
No, it's a mix of folks. It's not youth. It's a mix of folks. Some have played for a few years, some have never played. There was a stipulation that they had to read music, that we weren't going to cover those basics, but today's session we covered all the different techniques, and many had never seen what our scores look like in handbells and so forth. So we're starting from scratch. We have a second group called the Millbrook Ringers. Those two names are based on the roads that our building is on. They started last night, and that is a more advanced group that can't quite commit to the traveling schedule of the Raleigh Ringers, but wants to play intermediate and more advanced music. So we've got both of those groups started. We'll do little 12-week sessions, and we'll see how it goes. Do you culminate with a public performance with each of those groups then? Somewhat. We'll just do a sharing time in our building where we rehearse, which is where I am now, with family and friends. So not these folks really just wanted to do more ringing and not as much performing, but we've got to have something to shoot for. So we are going to do a final sort of concert at the end. Okay. You mentioned that commitment that it takes. Can you talk a little bit about, you are an all, except for you and Ruth, who is your administrator, I believe you're an all-volunteer organization. Can you talk about the commitment that it takes to be a member? Absolutely. We just finished up auditions too a little bit ago. So we have our new group for 2022. And what the group signs up for, we have our scheduled concerts for the year, which in general about 20 to 25, and a Thursday rehearsals, which are 3.5 hours long. We pretty much ask folks, they've got to do a lot of self-study of the music, because some of them travel, upwards of 3 hours back and forth for rehearsal. They come from Charlotte, North Carolina, from Virginia Beach, Virginia. So extra rehearsals are sometimes difficult. So they do a lot of home study, a lot of work, coming early and staying late sometimes with sectional work. But the commitment also is, we're joining you guys as part of a week-long tour. So folks that have full-time jobs have to take vacation during that week. And most of the other concerts we do are weekend, what we call mini tours. So we do about 5 or 6 of those, where we'll leave on a Friday and come back late on Sunday, doing a concert Saturday night and Sunday afternoon, somewhere on the East Coast that we can reach, kind of thing. So we have folks very committed. They several of our members, they're so into handbells that they move to Raleigh and move their families to Raleigh to audition for the Raleigh Ringers, and then they find employment, or their husbands find jobs and so forth. So it's that important to these folks. It's number one on their priority list. So these are serious handbell people that are part of our group, and we're blessed with lots of talent even before we start rehearsing. So it's wonderful for me. And you mentioned the audition process. Well, can you talk? I know you at least I understand that everyone has to audition every year. That's right. We've got 2 members that have been in, all 31 years, and they even have to go back through auditions each year. So we have several parts of the auditions, individual rhythm exercises and bell coordination exercises that they go through, recognition of handbell techniques to make sure that they're up on, what our scores look like. And then we spend good bit of the evening on sight reading new handbell music, moving people around in different positions, because unlike most bell choirs, we change spots a lot, and some people might not be used to that. So we do a little bit of that. And then the final part is an interview I do with each member to talk about the commitment involved, to make sure they understand that, you know, each and every performance that's on the calendar is mandatory. I mean, we've got emergency situations that pop up, but they understand the commitment level and understand, you know, the work involved behind the scenes, both in extra prep that they have to do for concerts and committee work and so forth. We own a building and some vehicles, and Ruth handles a lot of great things for us administratively, but there are a lot of committee things that have to happen within the group to keep it together. We've got 18 members. We generally, you know, go 16 to 18 each year. We got 18 members, and so there's a lot involved, but it's very rewarding.
This is a question that popped into my mind when you were talking about how they had to practice at home. How does one practice handbells at home? I would think it'd be much different from practicing, if I was a trombonist, practicing a trombone part to a symphony orchestra, because you're playing one note in a melody or one note in a rhythm. How do you practice that at home?
That you're right on a very important point. Yeah, that makes this instrument challenging and rewarding in the same way, and that we have to really work as a team. So what folks do often is, you know, they have a difficult passage where they've got to change from left hand, right hand, put this bell over here, grab this bell here, and they will improvise using, you know, spoons or, you know, something else just to get something in their hands. We do have the luxury of having this wonderful rehearsal facility, so people do come on their own and put their hands on the actual bells too, or bring the people to their left and to their right with them to work out that very difficult passage. But a lot of it is just getting that muscle memory. No matter what that element is, you just got that. I go here, I wait, I grab this, I do this, and just get that, you know, get that in your brain. But you're right. That's what's sometimes difficult for folks. And we were talking about that in this morning class this morning. People have come to this to learn handbells. They know music, so they're used to, you know, there's several people playing your trombone part, your clarinet part, you know, and so you've got 4 or 5 people doing the same line. With handbells, you know, you are the middle C, and, you know, and generally 2 diatonic notes and the accidentals. If you're not there, it's just not there, right? So that can be stressful, but I have found that all the work involved in putting that together, when it does come together and you're able to really make a piece happen, that's really rewarding, because you've done that as a team. But yeah, you're on a great point. It's not easy to rehearse by yourself.
Yeah, because one thing is with the trombone or a clarinet or a violin, usually if you have a melody, you have the entire phrase, or you have a good bit where that's just not just picking that one note out on the 3rd 16th note or the 4th 16th note. I would make my brain explode.
Yeah, exactly.
That actually gets me to another point. You're talking about the switching and the running around and grabbing different bells. I think part of the enjoyment of a Raleigh Ringers concert is the visual spectacle of the entire thing and all the coordination that goes into that. Can you talk a little bit about all the various kinds of bells, from the biggest to the smallest, and how you coordinate the kind of the choreography for a piece or for a show?
Absolutely. So our main set of bells, and some on the call I know are bell people. Our main set of bells are Malmark bells, made, you know, near Philadelphia in Plumsteadville, and we have the largest breadth of that set that they make, which goes from, you know, middle C is C5, so our bells go from G1 up to C9. The bottom 10 bells that we have in that set are made of aluminum. So those are the big silver ones. You may have seen us either on video or in concert. A little bit lighter, a little bit more fundamental you hear in that note, so less overtones. But then we like to experiment with other kinds of bells. So we own 7 different kinds of bells, including Whitechapel bells made in England, Pettit and Fritzen Dutch bells, very different overtones in those that we don't often play chords with. We usually play highlight single lines with. We have silver melody bells made by Schulmerich, again in Pennsylvania. They also have really weird overtones that we highlight lines to really bring out, parts of the music where the middle bells we might need to hear a little bit more. We'll throw the silver melody bells in. We have choir chimes, which are pretty common with most church handbell groups. The full 6 octaves down to the ones that are really, really tall that we play with mallets. So those are the big tubular chime instruments. They're really like glorified tuning forks, if you will.
Is that kind of is that different than orchestral bells?
Yes, we won't. We have orchestral chimes as well, but these things. Yeah, I was going to say, go grab one, Ruth. We're in the room. These are often used with kids groups and sometimes seniors groups. They're a little more durable than handbells, and they're cheaper to purchase, but they provide, well, yeah, let's get a regular, well, here's a giant one Ruth is going to come with. It doesn't have a clapper on it. It's taller than Ruth.
This is tall as I am.
Or it's just as tall,
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's what, and you hit that with a mallet up here to get a tone. But the normal choir chime should get one of those. We just use for variety of sound. In our handbell literature, it's often written with different note heads on the note to play it with choir chimes so that we can bring out that melody. So she's got one coming here. So
Okay.
Ours are made by Malmark. There are 3 or 4 different makers of these, but this is what it looks like. And you can see this is a tuning fork kind of deal. You can hold the bottom. It doesn't vibrate. It's only the top here that plays with that clapper. The one Ruth first showed you didn't have a clapper assembly on it. You have to actually play that with a mallet. But to answer your other question, Carl, I will do bell assignments and put people in relative positions. And if we've played the piece before, we have worked out some of the choreography and who gets what bell here and who passes this bell to this person and so forth. Year to year, we got new members, so we'll change that and say, well, that didn't necessarily work out as well for this person, so they changed where that bell gets passed. And then when we get a brand new, fresh piece of music, like we have a couple this year that we've never played before, that's an open slate where we have a piece we were working on last night where, gosh, I really can't hear the melody in this part. Let's try Whitechapel's here, see if that works. It involves sometimes real estate issues. So ringers have so many bells in front of them that, they hardly have space for, their music and other things. So sometimes that is a constraint, all the space that's taken up by some of the upper bell ringers that put these different instruments. But, we do a 2-hour concert. So we've always felt like as much variety as we can have, both in the repertoire that we play and in the sounds that you hear, the more interesting that will be for the listener. So we try to use all of those different instruments as much as possible without going overboard and making it gimmicky kind of thing. So we've had wonderful donors over the years that have given us generous donations that have helped us buy all this equipment. Some of the equipment we have, we keep our fingers crossed, like the Pettit and Fritzen bells, they don't really make them anymore. So if anything goes wrong, we're kind of in trouble. But we're glad to have all of these at our disposal.
I didn't realize you changed the number. I knew you changed with auditions, you changed the members to some extent year to year, but I didn't know you changed the number of members. So sometimes you have fewer or more, and the amount of work that must create for you guys to choreograph a piece every time that happens.
That's exactly the challenge. Yeah, especially when we get to our lower bass area where most bell positions are 2 notes and the accidentals around that notes, but the low bass is very different. Every song varies. Bells come up on the table, they go off that aren't used. And we've worked that bass part out for 3 people or 4 people one year, and then we have one less. Then yes, you're exactly on a really good point. Then we've got to, sit down with a pencil and say, well, that's not going to work. This person has to take this here and this one. So, but yeah, it sort of depends on our attendance at auditions and where we draw the line kind of on people that can commit to the schedule and people that have performed well in the audition. And generally it's been 17 or 18 the last several years.
Okay. And I have a couple more questions that I'm going to ask Dave, and then we're going to throw the floor open for questions from everyone. I think Suzanne mentioned at the very beginning, if you have a question and you are a little shy and don't want to say it out loud, you can type it in the chat and Suzanne can read them. Or otherwise, just raise your hand, either physically, or you can raise your hand with the little hand raise button down at the bottom on your Zoom, on your reactions button, and Suzanne or Michael will call on you, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question that way as well. But just a couple more questions that I have for you, David. I know COVID affected everybody, but considering what you do and how closely coordinated everything is, it must have really affected you. Can you talk a little bit about how you did have to react to COVID and how it changed things for you and how you're overcoming it now?
Yes. So, we had auditions and we were ready to jump into 2020, and about 2.5 months of rehearsals. Had 1 or 2 new members. When we started to get the word that that the 6-foot distancing was a requirement and a mandate in our area, that's when we decided, we really can't pull off what we do with the Raleigh Ringers. And if those of you have seen us with the interaction we have to share bells and to do what we do with the amount of instruments we have, we've done some recording, and we did a Christmas, several pieces at Christmas for a TV station, all on separate tables, which was a good way to keep ringing. But the way the Raleigh Ringers traditionally play, we decided we really couldn't do that. So it ended up being 22 months between real concerts that we had done, that we had to put things on hold. Like I said, we did a couple little things. We did some organizational things that we've been wanting to do for a while, like cleaning up our music files, doing some restructure of our bylaws, and some of those things that you put, on the back burner because you never have time to do. We had some time to do some of those things. So that was productive and good, but we weren't making music. So when July of last year came around, and they lifted the restrictions, yes, we still wear masks, but we didn't have to be 6 feet apart. We decided to get back together. And the people that passed auditions back in the previous year, they were invited first to be back. So we didn't have formal auditions. We had a couple open spots because in 22 months, people move, people's lives change, and they couldn't commit. So we were able to invite a couple alumni back to fill some spots. And then this past fall, starting in September, we were able to, again, do concerts. We were able to do our main concerts on our Mamandi concert stage, which is where the North Carolina Symphony plays, in December. We had 2 concerts. One of them was over 1,000 people. The other was a little smaller. But it started to feel like normal again. So we are still wearing masks, and we will, as long as they're requiring them, we will. But it was a tough, for these people that I mentioned earlier that move here to do this, they're so passionate about playing handbells, to not do that for 22 months was very difficult. But we're back.
Yeah, it was rough. Going without music, live music for that long was rough on all of us. But I can only imagine, considering how closely you have to work, what that must have been like.
Yep.
My final question: you are a local fellow. I do, to some extent. You grew up in the general neighborhood and then went to Penn State. Can you talk a little bit about where you're from and when you went to Penn State and kind of what organizations you were involved with there as far as music?
This particular topic, you might have to cut me off because we start talking about Penn State, and it's a big passion of mine. So I grew up in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, so like 40 minutes from State College, and moved there from Jersey, where I was born, but still feel like Lock Haven's home, and went to school at Penn State, was in the blue band, did handbells growing up. So in the Great Island Presbyterian Church in Lock Haven was where I learned to play bells. When I went to college, State College, the Presbyterian Church there, I played a little bit in there when I had time between my college studies. So I substituted and played a little bit, and then subsequently got my wife to be and I got jobs in North Carolina. We we joined a church that had handbells down here. But I am a big Penn State fan. My wife and I go to bowl games. We go to about 2 or 3 home games a year. My dad still has season tickets that we get split among the family. So we're hoping that we've played at the Arts Festival a number of years. They haven't committed to their schedule yet. We're hoping part of the tour, we've got a date set aside to go back to the Arts Fest up in State College, and they've been very nice to us up there. And we end up playing, you know, the Penn State fight song, "Fight on State," that a friend of mine arranged for handbells when we do play at Arts Fest. So that's always fun to get the crowd going with Penn State excitement. So.
Were you a percussionist in the blue band, or?
I was not. I played baritone.
Oh, okay.
Yep, I played close to your trombone. Yep, so
yeah.
A lower brass instrument.
All right, Suzanne, do we have questions from the chat, or does anyone want to raise their hand for a question?
Mary was wondering what the financial arrangement is for Raleigh Ringers. Who is considered staff? What you do to cover your travel expenses, maintenance of the bells? Yeah,
so as Carl mentioned, Ruth and I are paid staff, the music director and the business manager. We also have administrative assistant Emily, who, you know, when we have orders to package up and you know, other tasks, she puts a few hours in a week to help us out, and has done that job for a while and does wonderful. When it comes to financial arrangements, most, you know, and again, this is why we were hurt a little bit during the pandemic. Income comes from, you know, concert fees. When we weren't doing concerts, you know, that was a little difficult. From sales of CDs and videos. So, you know, very fortunate. Maybe some of you have seen the PBS special, but very fortunate that across the country that PBS show gets pretty good coverage. And we're on our second one of the PBS shows. And at the end of that show, there's a little blurb about, if you want a copy of this, you know, the DVD's for sale. So that's been a very helpful thing. We've had a little bit of success over the years with grants. Ruth has had some good success this past year. Again, with the extra time, we put in for some extra grants, and we were fortunate to get the, you know, the PPP grant that was provided for organizations that, you know, couldn't always do payroll, and then the shuttered venues grant for things, again, for arts groups that were shut down. You know, that's pretty much, and then we have, I'm surprised I didn't mention it, but we have an amazing amount of wonderful donors that's, you know, give a significant amount each year to help, that are big time Raleigh Ringer fans. Typically that Friends of the Raleigh Ringers program goes towards either new equipment or upkeep of our equipment. But those are our main sources. And the other, maintenance of travel expenses, that's covered. Each individual member of the group, although they don't get paid a salary, all of their travel expenses are covered based on the, you know, the concert fees and the other income that I mentioned. So, and their costume fees, anything for their, you know, tuxedos or the dresses and so forth, are all covered by the group. So any expenses involved in the group are covered by the organization. And the maintenance of the bells, we're fortunate in that we have several members that are very, very skilled. I know some of the basics, but certainly not to keep the bells up to date. So we've got a member right now who's come back to us, Blake, who has a little side business where he works on bells and refurbishes bells. So we've got a lot of skills within the group that know, you know, what parts we need to have on hand in case we have something that breaks and so forth. So we don't always have that, but we're fortunate to have that right now.
So there's no membership dues then. If you make the
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. That's the first like 4 or 5 years we did have membership dues that were required by each member. But once we got in a little bit better position, we said, you know, that we, you know, the first time you're in the group, you have to pay a small fee, but only that first year, because that's what everybody had to do way back in 1990 when we got the group started. So we've kept that, but only your first year of membership do you have to pay that. Other than that, everything's provided for you.
I have a quick follow-up question.
Thank you.
Which is, you mentioned that some people move to Raleigh to be in the Ringers. Have you ever had someone move and then not make it?
That's an excellent question. No, we have not. And the reason why is before they move to Raleigh, I will invite them to come, and we do demonstration recordings for publishers of new music. I mentioned that we did a little bit of that even during the pandemic. I will invite them to do one of those sessions and more or less require them. And that is and I'll say, you know, although this won't be, you know, the final feedback, I will give you feedback on how that went. If you were able, you have Raleigh Ringer members on either side of you, and we're all sight reading music together. If it was obvious that you were kind of lagging behind the others, then I might give you the feedback that says, I don't think it's a good idea to move here. Or I will tell you, which has happened a number of times, that yes, I think you have a good chance of making it. I won't promise, but I'll tell them that they did keep up with everybody around them and so forth. But that's really a very good question. And we added that element a couple years ago, that they really should come to a recording for that very reason. I'd hate to see that happen, for people to come and, you know, commit that way and not be able to make it. So.
Well, everybody's muted. If anybody wants to unmute and ask a question.
I see the Strauss's hand.
Yeah. I know, I mean, it's wonderful musical experience to listen to the Raleigh Ringers, but there's also a comedy element to that a lot of times, especially on the PBS special was great to see the Grinch come in, and also I always enjoy the Flight of the Bumblebee, so it's great. Who comes up with the ideas?
Well, that is definitely a joint effort. Some of those things happen by something that will happen in a rehearsal, where somebody goofs around. I don't allow a lot of that, but somebody is fooling around with a part, and we say, let's do that. If you, I think the most interesting one, if you Google our the Blue Christmas that we do at Christmas time, that one is really fun. What happens at the beginning of the piece, we have, you know, 4 of the larger gentlemen, I would say, that always are in the bass, and people are used to seeing them playing in the bass. And then 4 of the ladies that play often in the treble, and they are coming up with a little argument about whose part is harder. You know, and they say, well, you know, gosh, you can't lift all these bells, so the bass bells must be the hardest. And the ladies up in the treble say, well, look, we play 2, 3 in our hands. This is the hardest part. You guys could never do this. And they decide to swap positions. And as it turns out, the bass part was all done with mallets. They didn't have to lift the big bells, and the ladies do a great job. But the men, I mean, it just falls apart when it gets to the end. And some people don't like the fact that we kind of butchered the music a little bit, but Blue Christmas just goes down the tubes because those bass bells couldn't handle it. Playing up there. So that came from just an argument we were having in rehearsal, that people were, you know, were complaining about their parts up in the treble, and the bass ringers said, you guys, what are you guys talking about? You could never handle this. And we said, why don't we do that in concert? And it turned out to a little gag that we end up doing because people think it's funny. So it's just things that happen. Occasionally I'll come up with ideas, but usually it's ideas that happen within the members of the group, and they'll play around. We say, why don't we try this? And we try it, and if somebody laughs, we'll do it.
Yeah, we love the Grinch one. That was good.
That's funny.
Suzanne, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I have a granddaughter up in Rhode Island who my son always shows her the video of us, and she only wants to see Grinch. She said, I don't, this other stuff I don't really care about. Let me see the Grinch. So
I think if we have time for one more question, Suzanne. I see.
Does anyone want to unmute themselves and ask one more question? Oh, does she? Sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
You need to unmute yourself, Estelle.
Estelle, you're muted. You have to unmute. While Estelle's figuring that out, thank you so much, David. I'm going to write a killer press release. I learned so much on this call, and I know lots of people who would be thrilled if you played the Penn State fight song.
There, okay.
And we will, just for everybody who's on the call, before we let Estelle ask the last question, if you want to if you had if you found it as fascinating, as interesting as I did, we will have this up on our website and on our YouTube channel in a few days. If you want to tell people to go check it out.
Maybe we'll put it on
Yeah.
our website as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I had problems. I tried to unmute, but then a sign came up and I had to read that. Okay, I'm middle C in our church bell choir. And as some of the higher ones, the smaller ones, as you mentioned, do two of them at the same time. Not three. I think our one choir director was able to do that. But at any rate, how far down the scale, where does that stop that you can do multiples?
Well, I'll tell you what's typically done, and then I'll tell you, exceptions to that. So most of the time, with the doubling, it's done at the position about an octave above where you are. So that position that plays C and D, sixes and sevens, their Ds are doubled usually, and then the three positions above that, the E's and F's, G's and A's, B's and C's, we do doubling. But there are times when a piece of music, when we're working out a part where we've got to play something with the lower bells, where somebody has a quick switch and they've got to put it in four in hand in lower bells, even around where you are in the middle of the bell, and that takes a certain size of hand to be able to grab those handles that are bigger. So not everybody can pull that off, but we definitely, when we're going into problem solving mode, we will go outside of that normal typical bell assignment, and we'll give extra bells to people that will do it. But again, it takes pretty large hands to do the bigger bells four in hand. Now, those who aren't familiar, usually those are played in octaves. So you play two E's or two F's together. And that's sometimes called Shelley ringing. And our music, handbell music, is often written with that in mind, that people will be doubling the top melody. But some other music, like the music, some of you are familiar with Bucknell up there, and Dr. William Payne, who was up there for a number of years, writes music for us. And he won't typically follow the normal patterns. He'll say, "This is what I see in my music." And it might be harder for you handbell ringers, but you guys will work it out, kind of thing. And in that case, we will have to break some of the rules of normal assignments and move bells around to different areas to accomplish it. But that's kind of the challenge, and the fun for us is to working through those difficult passages.
Dave, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for joining us today. Please also thank Ruth for her role and her efforts to make this happen. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, David. We can all have a thank you so much. It was a great time.
We're looking forward to being back in Pennsylvania. So
Yay! We'll see you in July.